Hey everybody, the Soul Eater is out in the West now, so I wanted to make a video talking about what I have been learning about the Soul Eater. I'm focused mostly on the Knight's Edge build for the Soul Eater, and the only reason why that's the case was because it seemed a little bit more awkward, it seemed a little bit more difficult to grasp exactly how the class was intended to be played, in terms of practical rotations and stuff like that. So I dived through some of the information, both on the community guide, and they had a very nice link to Inven talking about some of the endgame Knight's Edge details, which I poured over a little bit, tried to use Google Translate to understand a little bit. So I wanted to summarize some of the things that I felt were important about that post. The links to both of these will be in the description below. So before we jump into it, I'm trying to grow my audience a little bit, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop by the stream, twitch.tv/Studiorainy. When I stream Lost Ark, I stream most weekdays. So if you're interested in watching Lost Ark content, head there. Now, apologies for the flashbang. Inven has a beautiful white background. But this was the post that I was linked to from the community guide, and the translation is a little bit rough, but here's where I'm understanding the Soul Eater rotation so far. If anybody has done any research, any of you viewers out there, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments and things that you think are particularly interesting or things to note. It can be difficult sometimes grasping certain classes in Lost Ark, and so it's useful to have all that information in one place. Now, there's a few things that I noticed that were particularly interesting about the rotation. Here's an example video, just to clarify where we're at. The build that I'm looking to play is the 413 build, and it uses the Nightmare Relic set, and we're going full crit and swiftness. So jumping into this video, there's a few things to note. If you guys want to know exactly what the 413 build looks like, go to the community guide and look through that stuff. It should tell you which skills to use, which skills to bring, and that'll give you information about what the names of these skills are that I'm still trying to learn. But from what I understand, of course, the basic idea of the Knight's Edge engraving is use a bunch of your purple and turquoise skills, and then when you fill up your 3 soul crystals or whatever they're called, you can use the pink skills to do good damage. But the thing about the Knight's Edge engraving is you can actually use the pink skills regardless of whether you have the crystals or not. The crystals just enhance its damage, and then they always give you some amount of meter. When that meter fills up, this bottom bar here, then you go into a different stage where you can't use any of your pink skills, but your purple skills become much quicker and do much more damage. That's the general overview. Well, how do we actually do this in a practical rotation? Well, this player has a video of them doing a Trixian parse. And from what we can gather here is they have a certain rotation of skills, okay? So I believe that's Lunatic, Soul Drain, and then, what's it called? Hazy? Harvest? Not Hazy, it's called Harvest. So those are critical skills, right? Lunatic Edge is your synergy. Soul Drain is a Stygian skill that you use, and it gives you a lot of meter. This seems to give the most meter out of anything. Or rather, I should say the most Soulstone meter out of everything. And then Harvest is one of your damaging gas skills alongside Lethal Spinning. So in this opening scenario, we've used Lunatic, we've used Soul Drain, and we've used Harvest. And that gives us our first pink skill that we use, which is the Guillotine, I believe. And what you'll notice is very commonly in this rotation, this player will use Guillotine and then immediately follow with a Reaper's Scythe without the crystals. See that? And so they immediately are doubling up on the damage here. And only the Guillotine is using the Soulstone crystals, okay? It's a little bit awkward, because if you were playing the build straight, you would expect, okay, every time I build up 3 Soulstones, that's the only time that I use a pink skill. But apparently, according to this player's research, that's not really the case. So not only do they use Reapers without the 3 Soulstones, but they use Guillotine that consumes the Soulstones, and then they use Reapers without the Soulstones, and then they use Lethal Spinning into Vestige without full crystals, okay? And you'll notice when you use these pink skills without full crystals, it doesn't actually consume anything, but you still build a little bit of gauge, okay? So he activates Vestige and goes across. And then this is another key point of the rotation. He's constantly trying to pair Lunatic and Harvest together, okay? So he uses Lunatic, which again is your synergy, and then Harvest. And when he does that, it exactly gives him 3 crystals again, which allows us to use the second charge of Vestige to go back through and do some damage. And you'll notice now that we're very close to actually filling out the last portion of this bar. And we're going to fill that out with another usage of that combo that we saw at the beginning of the rotation, where we use Guillotine into Reapers. Guillotine with 3 crystals, and then Reapers without crystals. So as we play out this rotation, we do another pairing of Lunatic and Harvest. And then we use Soul Drain. There it is. And then immediately we're using Guillotine, Reapers, and that puts us into the special mode that we have for Night's Edge. Now, the one other thing that I want to say about this portion of the rotation that I found to be particularly important in this particular case is you'll notice that we didn't use lethal spinning when it came off of cooldown. Okay. And my understanding for why this is the case is because lethal spinning is your biggest hitting ghastly skill. So you want that to be ready to make sure you can use it as many times as possible once you enter into your special state. Okay? So Soul Drain, Guillotine, Reaper, and then we're in the state and we immediately start with a lethal spin. And again, notice that we're always pairing Lunatic and Harvest together. Now, the other skill here is Rusted Nail, which is your counter. And I think what this player was demonstrating is that you don't actually have to use Rusted Nail to do your rotation, though you could add it in for a little bit of extra damage. You notice that there's a lot of downtime in between. But that flexibility of knowing that you don't actually have to constantly put your counter on cooldown is very nice, because then in fight scenarios where you know that a counter is coming up or you know it's important to counter, you have the peace of mind of knowing that you can save it and it's going to be fine. So once we enter the mode, we immediately start with lethal spinning. Then we go into Lunatic Harvest. And this is pretty straightforward. We're just cycling our skills, lethal spinning as much as we can, and then we're using Lunatic Harvest. And when we come out, you notice that our Soul Drain is ready again. Remember, that's our biggest Soulstone generator. So we're going to do Lunatic Harvest, Soul Drain, and then, surprise, surprise, we're back to that pattern of using Guillotine and Reapers. So this is basically, to my understanding, the general pattern of how you are going to want to approach the 413 Nightmare build for Soul Eater. Cycling Lunatic Harvest again. Again, notice that lethal spinning is going to be held now for us when we enter into the Deathlord state, I think it's actually called in the English translation. Soul Drain, Guillotine, and the Reapers puts us into the special state, and we immediately open with lethal spinning. Cool. That's about all we really want to know with the rotation. Guillotine and Reaper are tied together. Lunatic and Harvest are tied together. And then we use one Vestige outside of our crystals. And then we use the second charge of Vestige when we have 3 of the crystals built. So this section of the Inven post is just about skills and tripods. I think this generally should be the same as the community guide. This is a visual representation of the cycle, which honestly I kind of had a hard time reading. And then they go into some of the cases where what do you do if you're at some partial amount of meter filled, okay? So this video is an example of what you do when you're below half of the meter to the Deathlord mode. And it just demonstrates what you do with a cycle. And to my understanding, it's not really that different from the normal cycle. Synergy Harvest, and you use Soul Drain, Guillotine Reapers, and then you use a lethal spin. One Vestige without the crystals. You build the meter for the crystal, and you notice this time he uses Rusted Nail to get that little bit of extra meter. And so you can use a Vestige with the 3 soul crystals or whatever. And then now you're in the Deathlord trance mode, but you'll notice that you didn't have a usage of lethal spin here, which I'm assuming is fine for the math in this specific case. If you happen to catch yourself where there's maybe downtime or whatever, and then the boss comes back and you're at a little bit below half meter, then this is the rotation that you want to use. Then after we come out of the trance, everything is the same. Synergy Harvest, That builds us to 3 crystals, and we wait for the vestige cooldown. Then we do synergy harvest. We don't use the lethal spin. And then we do guillotine reaper, and then we use the lethal spin here when we enter the state. Okay? So as you notice, again, all of these patterns are very similar, right? The rotation has very similar elements that we can look to try to organize our thoughts in our head. One other note that the person makes in their guide here is that you'll notice that lethal spin, if we go into the game, you'll notice that lethal spinning is actually a back attack type skill. And to my understanding, because it does actually a good amount of damage, the player here is trying to optimize for using lethal spin when you're at the rear of the boss. And because vestige goes through bosses, they try to time it so that when they use vestige, it lands them in the back of the boss. So even though we aren't using something like ambush master and we're not generally playing as if we're a back attack class, we're basically playing as if we're hitmaster. In the case of lethal spinning, it seems like it's a pretty good idea to try to optimize for hitting the back with it. Like that. And then you're just cycling, right? Lunatic harvest, and then lethal spin. Cool. So this is a video that's showing us what this player thinks we should do when we have above half meter and the boss comes down and we have our cooldowns available to us. And I think there are a few differences in this video. I think they rush out a few more of the purple skills, and they might use a rusted nail. And then I believe, we'll watch the video, but I believe they maintain the cooldown on lethal spin. So remember, below half, we use lethal spin. Above half, I think we save lethal spin. So let's see what they do. Soul Drain, put the Synergy Harvest on, and then you do Guillotine Reaper, and then we do 1 Vestige, 2 Vestiges, and that puts us in the meter. All right, you see that? And then that allows us to use a lethal spin immediately. Now what this means is that there's actually some downtime at the end of this cycle. So we're doing our Deathlord Trance, we're finishing the cycle, and now we come out of it, we can use our Soul Drain. And so here's where the dead time shows up. We use a Vestige, and then we're going to use our Synergy Harvest, and it's going to build us 3 crystals, but we're still 4 seconds away from Vestige going back up. So we just wait. When it comes back up, we use it again, and then now we're realigned. Our rotation is realigned now, if you guys notice, because what we're going to do is we're going to use Soul Drain, we're going to use Guillotine, we're going to use Reaper, and that's going to put us in our Deathlord Trance or whatever, and then we're going to use Lethal Spin. There it is. Pink skill, and lethal spin. So pretty much those were the most notable things that I took from this guide, and it's probably what I'll be practicing my rotations on and trying to adapt this to practical situations as best as I can. And then there will probably be things that I learn after I play the class a little bit more. Here's an example of a 10-second burst. So 10-second window is like Bard level 2 buff, Atropine Potion, it's that kind of a thing. Let's take a look if there's anything interesting here. So Soul Drain, Synergy Harvest. This is the same. This is all the same. This is all the same. There it is. Okay, so I guess that's your 10-second window, right? You end with the double Vestige, with the last one being the 3 Soul Crystals, right? So this is basically the same exact rotation, okay? And then they have a video on a 20-second window. So 20-second window is a little bit more interesting because I believe Bard level 3 is 15 seconds of buff? I don't remember. But 20-second window is pretty interesting to look at as well. So let's see if there's anything notable here. They might end up using an Awakening. So I believe they said that they use this Pink Awakening because it does a little bit more damage and they didn't need the Soul Crystal generation. But I think typically if you're playing Knight's Edge, I think you'll probably be using the other Awakening. Synergy Harvest, we've seen all this before. Yep, and then they do Awakening at this dead time in the rotation. So I guess that's just like the most notable part of this. And then we use Guillotine Reaper and we're going into lethal spinning. So I guess the big takeaway here is where you fit in the Awakening. So it's after you use the second Vestige. Basically everything is on cooldown at this point, and that's the best time to use your Awakening. So makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. There's some FAQ stuff which I was too lazy to read, but maybe I'll go over and read it on my own time. But if you guys want any of this information, if you go to the Lost Ark community guide, there's a section here that links useful resources that links to what I was looking at, the Knight's Edge 413 Inven Endgame Guide. I have no idea if this will be good for our version of game, especially since I'm using the Power Pass version. So I've got level 6 event gems, and then when I get to 1540, I'm going to have level 7 gems. But we'll just try it and see, and then maybe I'll update you guys if there's anything significantly different about that. So you see when I was scrolling through the skills here, this is a Deathbringer Awakening. High amount of damage, and then it generates 3 soul stones. So I think this is probably the one that you would want to use. It saves you having to use a stimulant because your nightmare build anyway. So when the fight opens, you're gonna want to Awakening at the start, and then your Awakening gives you 3 soul stones. It seems pretty good. So with that, I'll keep playing the Reaper on Knight's Edge. You know, originally I was wanting to play Full Moon Harvester, but when I looked into it, it just didn't seem very interesting. It seemed very straightforward, which might not be the case, right? You never really know with these things until you actually play them. But some of the awkwardness and kind of like the non-obvious nature of how the Knight's Edge engraving was supposed to work just led me into doing some of this research. If you guys find anything interesting or know anything especially, let me know in the comments. Also, make sure you subscribe and do leave a comment showing some love. And then tune into my stream. Thanks, guys.